Joining us now for Word Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya, the lady in blue. On Friday.
That's me on Friday.
Good
yes.
morning.
Take away. My man.
That's me. You know what? Even I just saw blue Friday. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Hope you're all doing well.
You need to put this again.
Oh my goodness. Really? Scondolo, I told you. Good morning to you viewers. Let me tell you what's happening. Okay, exactly. You can't do it.
The fashion people out there will question you.
Can't do it.
Fashion sense.
Good morning to you viewers. Let me tell you what is
exactly.
Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Now, he wanted it, and now he's got it. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado told reporters she presented the medal for her Nobel Peace Prize to President Donald Trump at a private White House meeting on Thursday. But she didn't say at that point whether or not he had accepted it. Let's take a listen.
I presented the President of the United States the medal of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I told him this. Listen to this. 200 years ago, General Lafayette gave Simón Bolívar a medal with George Washington's face on it. Bolívar since then kept that medal for the rest of his life. Actually, when you see his portraits, you can see the medal there. And it was given by General Lafayette as a sign of the brotherhood between the United States, people of the United States and the people of Venezuela in their fight for freedom against tyranny. And 200 years in history, the people of Bolívar are giving back to the heir of Washington a medal, in this case a medal of the Nobel Peace Prize, as a recognition for his unique commitment with our freedom.
Well, beneath the surface, it does appear that Machado needs Trump, especially if she wants to return to Venezuela as president. And what's one thing that she has that Trump obviously wants? Well, she's got the Nobel Peace Prize. But can she actually make Trump an official Peace Prize recipient? Well, on the 9th of January, the Nobel Prize Committee said this. Essentially, if we take a look at their statement, they said that once a Nobel Prize is announced, the decision is final. After this point, it cannot be revoked, shared, or transferred. Just to be clear, that even though she's given him this gift, it can't be transferred. Now, despite her generous gesture and Trump's apparent happiness shown in a post on Truth Social where he thanked her for the sign of mutual respect, Trump, there we go, that's him thanking her, Trump still has to decline at this point to really endorse Machado, whose movement claimed victory in the 2024 widely contested elections back in Venezuela as its new leader. What he is instead still doing is backing the acting head of state there, who is Delcy Rodriguez. Now, she is Maduro's former vice president, who is now the current president, interim president, and she is reported to be a close ally of the likes of Vladimir Putin in Russia. It is at this point been nearly 2 weeks since the United States launched a military attack on Venezuela and captured incumbent Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores, who both remain in a detention center over in New York. Meanwhile, troops from France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom have arrived in Greenland. That's as US President Donald Trump continues to openly describe his ambitions to take control of the semi-autonomous part of Denmark. Now, if we look at these images, we do see these troops arriving. These are the French troops arriving. And our French President Emmanuel Macron said the initial contingent, which consisted of just 15 people, would be reinforced soon with land, air, and sea assets arriving soon also. Now, this is a sign that NATO allies are committed to Greenland security. However, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says that Poland was not planning to join the European military deployment to Greenland, but warned that any US military intervention there would be a political disaster. Now, earlier this week, Denmark and Greenland's foreign ministers traveled to Washington for a meeting with US Vice President J.D. Vance. That happened happened on Wednesday, and it didn't end well. All parties essentially continued their disagreement over how to proceed, but you did have Denmark and Greenland's representatives criticizing Trump's ambition to buy Greenland. For its own part, the White House says that its move will do little to deter Trump, meaning whatever Denmark and Greenland are talking about is doing very little to deter Trump from his ambitions. And lastly, moving on to the African continent, polls have closed in Uganda following the presidential and legislative elections amid allegations of electoral fraud, misinformation, and incitement of violence. Now, the election was plagued by widespread delays, in addition to days-long internet shutdown that has been criticized as an anti-democratic tactic in a country where the president has held office since 1986. Some polling stations remain closed for up to 4 hours after the scheduled 7 a.m. start time, and that was due to so-called technical challenges. That was according to the country's electoral commission, which asked polling officers to use paper registration records to ensure that the difficulties did not disenfranchise any voter. Results are due within the next 48 hours, but you might not get any prizes for guessing who wins. Nevertheless, let's take a look at our newspaper headlines. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day, and This Day reports that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has reaffirmed his commitment to supporting the Nigerian Armed Forces during the 2026 Armed Forces Remembrance Day, pledging that the nation will continue to honor soldiers who paid the ultimate price. This Day also reports that the son of the former Vice President, Atiku Abubakar, he has defected to the APC, vowing to mobilize for President Tinubu's re-election come 2027. Now, the Daily Independent, however, still on the topic of Armed Forces Day, reports that although absent from the Abuja ceremony, President Tinubu personally penned a message praising fallen heroes for sustaining the nation's freedom and peace. The Vice President, Kashim Shettima, did represent Bola Ahmed Tinubu, our president, at Eagle Square, laying wreaths on his behalf, while top officials, including the Senate President, you can see him laying that wreath there, including the Senate President, and of course the Minister of Defense were physically present. Let's move on to the Vanguard. The Vanguard reports that prominent Nigerians, it's this story across here, the gun hegemony. Prominent Nigerians, including Emeka Anyoku, Samamuka, Ayo Okpadokun, have blamed decades of military intervention for Nigeria's stalled growth and called for an urgent return to a truly federal, pluralistic constitution. That's as political leaders led by President Tinubu, represented by his chief of staff, Femi Gbajabiamila, and the Lagos State Governor, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, paid tribute to the launch of Okpadokun's book, The Gun Hegemony. Let's take a look at the Daily Sun. Lovely. Okay, so the Daily Sun this morning does report that the Nigeria Revenue Service has clarified that the new Nigeria Tax Act does not impose VAT on banking transactions themselves, only on service fees such as transfers, USSD charges, card issuances, and account maintenance.
Very good.
Thank you. I feel like they put that out for us. Moving on to the New Telegraph. The New Telegraph reports, again, just across the top here, the New Telegraph reports that Nigeria has been removed from the European Union's list of high-risk jurisdictions for money laundering and terrorism financing. This follows the exit from the FATF grey list 3 months ago. You remember we reported that. Now, that move is expected to ease cross-border transactions, lower compliance costs, and boost investor confidence, with enhanced due diligence requirements set to be lifted from the 29th of January 2026. Let's take a look at The Guardian. Now, The Guardian this morning, as always, has very interesting stories, really interesting write-ups. But they report that foreign airlines from Nigeria are experiencing a drop in passenger traffic. This comes after US visa restrictions, with students, professionals, and diaspora travelers delaying trips due to denied or delayed visas. And the Middle East are also seeing lower load factors, essentially, as travelers postpone or cancel trips amid these visa uncertainty. So it is having a knock-on effect, what happens in America. Let's take a look at The Punch. Meanwhile, The Punch does report that the US has approved $413 million for counterinsurgency operations here in Nigeria and other African countries in 2026. This is happening under the National Defense Authorization Act. Let's take a look at some African papers now. This is the Daily Nation of Kenya. We're talking so much about the effect of Trump's sanctions on other countries around the world, including Nigeria, but the Daily Nation of Kenya leads with why Kenya has escaped these types of sanctions, such as, of course, that visa freeze under Donald Trump's return. Now, the paper article says that Kenya's strategic importance to the United States on immigration, trade, security alliances, and aid has kept Nairobi shielded from hostile policies imposed on other countries. Shall we move on to UK? Well, the Daily Express has Tory leader Kemi Badenoch saying that bad people are leaving her party. That's after she sacked Robert Jenrick ahead of his defection from the Conservative Party to Reform UK. You got Jenrick there next to a good old Nigel Farage. And then finally, in a spoof of what's happened, in the same note, The Sun draws parallels between The Traitors, the television show, and the ousted Shadow Justice Secretary's move to Nigel Farage's party. Those are your newspaper headlines and your brief. Love to hear your thoughts.
Real quickly, and I'll tell a story this morning. For Machado to go to Trump and try to invoke the name of Bolivar is a big disgrace. Bolivar, Simeon, was a general that fought for his people and liberation of his people. He didn't kowtow to dictators. He fought dictators. He fought the hegemony of Spain out of South America. And it's a recognition of that. Another great general that fought colonialism and the hegemony of dictators, General Lafayette, that played a formidable role in fighting the hegemony of Great Britain against America, also gave him that commemorative plaque. Or medal. So for you to invoke the name of Simeon Bolivar when you are trying to kowtow to somebody with a dictatorial tendency, somebody that invaded your country, is the height of hypocrisy. And this is the story. You see, Femi, when you are a person of honor, honor will come to you. Awards is not a recognition of your honor. In 1964, where Jean-Paul Sartre was given a Nobel Prize, he rejected it because he felt that writers should not be institutionalized. Jean-Paul Sartre had honor. In fact, the prize had been given before his letter got there to reject the honor.
Right.
But to show the kind of honor Jean-Paul Sartre had, in 1968, when this was on wheat riots were happening in France and the students were protesting, guess what happened? A police officer arrested Jean-Paul Sartre because he was protesting on the streets. The president of France, Charles de Gaulle, called the police officer and asked him, "Do you arrest Voltaire?" That means Jean-Paul Sartre had become an institution in the hearts of people. So this honor Trump is looking for, if he does good deeds, he will live in the hearts of people.
Agreed.
Not scampering to get a prize that Alfred Nobel himself instituted to be able to correct history. Because the origin was the fact that when his brother Ludwig died, they thought it was Alfred Nobel that died. And they ran a story called The Merchant of Death is Dead. And Alfred Nobel thought that if I had died, so this was how they would have remembered me, because Alfred Nobel was actually the man that invented dynamite that was used in killing people.
Several stories this morning. Where do I begin? Let's begin in East Africa. Kenya, at the front page of, Daily Nation, talking about how Kenya has been able to escape, U.S., can I call it punishment,
yes,
amid all that's going on. And when you look at the deeper side of it, as much as, we might try to look at policies and all of that, the truth of the matter is that, number one, William Ruto went to meet Donald Trump and agreed to that health deal that is already being challenged in Kenyan courts. This health deal that gives the United States access to Kenyan private health data, in essence, for the purposes of research or whatever it is. And Kenyans are already pushing back because they deem it to be unconstitutional and an infringement on their privacy. The other thing that William Ruto has done is that he had actually concluded a 98% zero duty trade deal with China, meaning 98% of goods from the Kenyan market going to China would now attract zero duty. United States told them to pause that deal, and they've paused that deal. So you can see that this is what happens happens when when you play to the tune of the piper, is that you get a nice little pat on the back as a good boy. Now, to quickly segue to, there's no time, but to quickly segue to Uganda, where we saw the mass failure of what they call their version of the BVAS, which is a BVK. Only 5% of those deployed worked yesterday. And the president, Museveni, even came out to say that his own didn't work. He had to vote by facial recognition. And he says that he thinks that the opposition infiltrated the system to make sure that it wouldn't work. Quite, shall I call it irony?
Okay. The Uganda process, we said yesterday that the outcome is predictable. Museveni wants to remain in power. And the electoral process yesterday more or less confirmed it. They have had to apologize for technical glitches. Voting materials arrived very late. The biometric machine did not work in many parts. Voting did not start early. Voting did not end at the appointed time. The results will be announced 1300 hours GMT tomorrow, Saturday, 1600 hours local time in Uganda. But of course, you can be sure that the national resistance movement will win. Again, questions about democracy in Africa, free and fair and credible electoral process. Now, as for Machado, what is the main story? Machado is anti-Chavez. She is anti-Maduro. She wanted to be part of the 2024 elections in Venezuela. She was disqualified. And that was how Edmundo Gonzalez took part in that process. She was not necessarily Trump's candidate, but Trump and the Americans said the results should be released. Up to now, nobody knows who won. Now, Maduro was removed January 4. And since then, the issue has been, what's the way forward for Venezuela? Now, of course, naturally, Machado, the opposition leader, is interested in the position. Delcy Rodriguez, who is the former vice president, who had initially criticized Trump, is now said by Trump to be very cooperative. Now, this bottom line is one, the ambition of Rodriguez to remain in power, and also Machado, who wants to be the opposition leader that will manage the transition. And that was why last week she said she was going to give a Nobel Prize to Trump. The Nobel community said it cannot be revoked once it is issued, it cannot be transferred, it cannot be conferred on another person. Maybe the medal can be transferred, but not the prize itself. Yes. But of course, the story is that Trump says, Rodriguez is behaving well and he would rather stay on her side. But he even spoke with Rodriguez on Wednesday, and she is sending an emissary to reopen Venezuela embassy, and there is also a plan for her to visit. As for NATO, there was a meeting Wednesday in the US between the foreign ministers of Denmark and Greenland. Now, there was no agreement. There were fundamental disagreements. Now, these European countries are trying to jump the gun and say that, look, Article 5 of the NATO treaty says an attack against one is an attack on one. It's symbolic, it's historic, but they want to say they are present, even if the troops are small. However, Trump says he's the only one, it's only America that can protect Greenland, not Russia or China, who are deepening their presence in the Arctic. Thank you.